Welcome to The Beat. I'm Ari Melber. We are tracking the continued Trump-induced economic problems in the country. There are some signs of relief, but also a ton of problems. And as we've been doing since this story hit Main Street and Wall Street and affected so many people, we're going to walk through it on the evidence. We have the Trump economic agenda, which is not working. We have markets plummeting again after the easing that we saw yesterday. We warned you last night in our reporting that the tariff problems that arrived initially at 10% were where we landed. So we were telling you then what the markets then started to price in today, that these are big problems and that there is uncertainty because of who leads the United States right now. Continuing on that point, we have new tariffs to report today, which rolls back some of the gains yesterday and also shows that there was no grand strategy as some MAGA allies were trying to claim, or as I told you, some people concerned about the markets were hoping that just praising Trump for being a master tactician might help him further retreat from what he had blown up. Tonight, we have a very special guest on this who says that Trump is erratic and that his policies are stupid and that we could all have to pay for them. The Nobel Prize-winning economist, Paul Krugman. So that is a special guest, one of the best you could ask for. The big news is Trump dialing up more tariffs to China up to 145%. The 10% tariffs I mentioned, which are still in place, has begun to fuel even more of the fear and uncertainty that led to the market crashes, which had Trump backing off and retreating yesterday. If he were to retreat entirely, you wouldn't get back to zero, but you would get away from some of the worst problems. But he's only retreated partially, and the uncertainty is feeding this.
Stocks are selling off sharply again today as a new reality sinks in. And let's start with some numbers. 1,500 is about the amount of points the Dow is down right now. And of course, the biggie, 145%. That's the total tariff rate on China now.
After the historic rally we saw yesterday, the Dow tumbles as the White House says its tariffs on China are actually higher than what the president had announced yesterday.
The S&P down more than 3%.
Market sell-off is accelerating. Straight up yesterday, down significantly this morning. Janet Yellen, she says Trump's economic policies are the worst self-inflicted wound by an administration on a well-functioning economy. Markets down.
The worst. You were just watching Fox coverage. That's one of the Fox News channels, Fox Business, quoting the Wall Street Journal, which I'm going to read to you in more depth in a moment. But what you're seeing there is that some realities can't be denied. This isn't working. And as the Wall Street Journal emphasized, it didn't need to be this way. This is not one of those unpredictable or confusing market meltdowns that takes months to investigate because of macroeconomics. This is Trump. Trump, Trump, Trump. This is Trump policy. Don't take my word for it. I'm quoting the Wall Street Journal, owned by Rupert Murdoch, which is both a financial Bible and it leans right, and the editorial page supported basically Donald Trump's election. It is a turnaround from what was the initial excitement about him backing off at all yesterday. One report says the euphoria is fading, and any on-paper gains that appeared yesterday are getting wiped out again. The top 500 companies down another 3.5 points and down 6% in the last month. So you see the bit of relief yesterday, as we told you last night, didn't go anywhere near back to the economy that Trump was inheriting, and it's down another 3.5 points today. The Dow down over 2 points, down over 5 from the last month. Another way to say it, if you're not into all the charts, I'll put it like this. If Donald Trump just didn't go to work for the last 2 weeks, none of these $6 trillion mistakes would be happening. If Donald Trump just golfed for the last 2 weeks like he had when the crisis hit that he started, if he just golfed instead of messing with monetary trade and international economic policy, you wouldn't have these problems. There is a level of illogic here that you have to address. And it may sound unkind to say that a president and his entire policy are illogical or worse. We don't mean it as criticism or opinion. We mean that there is no logic to be found in what he's been doing, and the markets in this country and abroad are reacting. The Times reports on how Trump scaled back the tariffs. The real credit, Trump's advisors admit, goes to the bond markets. Mr. Trump's decision driven by, quote, fear Fear not strategy, fear not strength. This is according to the New York Times sourcing inside the White House and elsewhere, that the tariff scandal could turn into a, quote, financial crisis, unlike the two previous crashes of the past 20 years, which I just mentioned to you, that were complicated, the global financial crisis of '08, fed by synthetic securities and real estate, and the completely uncontrollable pandemic of 2020. Unlike those, the Times writes, this crisis would have been directly attributable to only one man, Donald Trump. Now I'll go to the striking quote in Rupert Murdoch's Wall Street Journal, which was read aloud on Fox. So Fox viewers and other conservatives are hearing about this, and as well as able to check their own retirement accounts. Quote, Trump told advisors he was willing to take pain. He privately acknowledged his trade policy could trigger a recession, but said he wanted to be sure it didn't cause a depression. That's the Journal's financial reporting. Other outlets saying Trump blinked. While the chaos is not over. The market swings that are a response to Trump, the uncertainty which prices in choices he's made or refused to make, and the way that he has freestyled all of this improv to the very end, to the point that when they did try to stop the bleeding yesterday, you still had confusion on the White House lawn about which countries and which tariffs still applied, which doesn't give confidence even as they back off the worst parts of it, that the market said, okay, thank goodness it's not this. But none of this is logical, and much of it is being announced inconsistently. That's not the secure guidance you want for the global economy. It also undercuts the few talking points that were thrown out on the right to try to make sense of the illogic. Look at the contrast between Trump allies yesterday claiming it was all a secret plan to back down without getting anything back, when the markets were a little relieved that it wasn't going as far as it could have, versus today's reality.
We begin with the art of the deal. Told you this was going to happen.
Trump announced a brilliant move to pause the higher tariffs.
Stocks after that announcement shot up on the news.
A huge win for the president, a huge win for the country.
It's genius.
The haters, the doubters, all the people on the left wing, they were all proven wrong. They all, as usual, end up with egg on their face.
That was last night. Who has egg on their face now? Who was proven wrong? The point is not to single out Mr. Hannity or anyone else making claims that are factually false if you just look at a week-long stock chart. The point is that the stakes are too high to do the usual political spin. Here we are, the market's plunging a day later. And then the timing. The Associated Press reporting Trump publicly urging people to buy online hours before he made the pause that he would, according to the timeline, appear to have known when he posted that, signing it himself DJT. But that's also a stock symbol for his company. Quote, it's not clear if Trump was saying buy stocks in general or his stock, Trump Media, which did close up double the broader market. Remember all the talk about draining the swamp? Or the claim that having a businessman, high net worth president, whatever his exact wealth, he's richer than an average person who's done public service their whole life, that would somehow insulate us from this stuff. In fact, it looks like the opposite. He's got his own Bitcoin-style currency that he's been hawking. Elon Musk has promoted his currency while in office, but also in business. They recently held a Tesla demonstration at the White House. Tesla's been battered by all this. There are big questions, even amidst the priority of first stabilizing the markets, about whether corruption is seeping into what the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal agree is a Trump-induced crisis, with the risk of being one of the greatest crashes in the last several decades.
Who knew in advance that the president was going to once again flip-flop on tariffs? And are people cashing in?
This could be an enormous scam.
There is just all too much opportunity for people in the White House and the administration to be insider trading, and you can't put it past them for a minute.
I'm very interested in what members of Congress have been buying and trading stocks in the last 24 hours prior to this tariff announcement.
Those are some of the questions that lawmakers are asking, so we're showing you the news of what they're saying. I want to be clear in fact-checking that there has not been any formal claim of insider trading against anyone. This is all happening fast, nor have the federal entities that are supposed to do this independently. They're not supposed to have any political bias. SEC and others are not saying anything about this. So we're not reporting on some new finding. but we're showing you serious questions lawmakers are asking. Wall Street is not calmed even after the initial kind of exhale that this might not go on as bad as it looked forever, because Trump did retreat a bit. But here's JP Morgan. They tell their own investors, we still think a contraction this year is more likely than not. And then I showed you the Wall Street Journal reporting, then the editorial board, which is a different part of the paper, of course. They're the ones that do endorsements and put more politics. The editorial board says these moves are evidence markets believe the biggest threat to the world economy is Mr. Trump's tariffs. I'm going to leave that on the screen for another moment. This is the Wall Street Journal, as I mentioned, kind of a financial Bible. They're the sister outlet of Fox News. They care a bit more sometimes about financial issues than pure partisan politics. That would be the clear message today. Everyone in the White House, everyone around Trump can see this. This is still Murdoch's empire. And they are saying, I repeat, the markets think the biggest threat to the world economy is Trump's tariffs. That's just one view. Then you have people who do economics for an actual living and do it independently. So they're not just talking on behalf of, say, one company or the recession outlook predictions I've shown you from some of the top banks. The Nobel Prize winning economist, Paul Krugman, writing in his newsletter, destructive uncertainty about future policy has increased. And he can walk you through in plain English, which is one of the reasons he's a popular economist, not just a Nobel winning one, what that uncertainty is. He dates it to exactly Donald Trump's choices, emotions, style of, or failure of leadership, and says the prices are only going up. There's also a market measure that tries to look at uncertainty. This is the volatility index. I'll put this in full for everyone. These are, of course, rough measures. But what you see here, according to many market analysts, to how Krugman references it, is a volatility that's going up and is a problem, not because of some uncontrolled international development, but because of how Donald Trump is leading or failing to lead. The economist Krugman says it is an erratic and weak style with huge costs for many. He's our special leadoff guest in 90 seconds. We're joined by Nobel Prize winning economist Paul Krugman, who has a new piece taking all of these issues in, talking about Trump's, quote, stupid, erratic, and weak approach. Welcome.
Hi there.
You make several points. I would love to try to bring some of your writing to life, as well as anything else you're thinking tonight with the latest developments. So I propose we go in pieces, Professor.
Sure.
And we start with point number one, which is you say, even with the retreat, Trump has caused a protectionist shock if the current tariffs just stay in place. Can you explain?
Yeah. So one way to think about it is during the campaign, you remember the election campaign, Trump said, well, I'm going to have 10% tariffs across the board and 60% on China. And everybody said, oh, that's too extreme. He's not really going to do that. That's just a campaign rhetoric. And what this supposed retreat is 10% on everybody and more than 130% on China. So what we're actually in this supposed pause, we actually have tariffs that are beyond what anybody imagined was going to happen. In fact, because of the increase in the tariffs on China, it's not clear that this is less protectionist, that this is less of a burden on consumers than what he had before the sudden change in policy. So this is really, people talk about the infamous Smoot-Hawley tariff. This pause is a tariff rate that is higher overall than Smoot-Hawley.
Wow.
This is a bigger shock to the economy than any trade policy in any country's history, as far as I can as far as I can figure out. So this is a really big and really destructive deal.
Wow. We've talked to quite a few people. When you put it like that, and that's supposed to be the retreat or quote unquote better position, it's really striking. Point number two, you say this quote destructive uncertainty has increased, and you say that's not the regular uncertainty of the world. There could be another pandemic, right? There could be anything. Right. You're saying that's Trump induced. Can you explain?
Okay, so we have this current tariff policy is explicitly it's for 90 days, and then something will happen. And we don't know what comes after the 90 days. Trump doesn't know what comes after the 90 days. Businesses certainly don't know. So if you're a business, a business owner or a manager trying to make decisions, trying to decide on investments, whatever, you know, any investment you make now could turn out to be totally the wrong investment depending on what the tariff policy is. Did the tariffs go up? Do they go country by country? It's a crazy, the world. There's always uncertainty in the world, but now the biggest source of uncertainty is we don't know what will be going on in the mind of Donald Trump 3 months from now. That's no way to run an economy.
Yeah. Yep. Then you wrote something that was even more concerning. I will mention also you paraphrased James Carville and said it's the uncertainty, stupid, which I think people can grasp, especially everyone's watched the last week. Trump's friends, MAGA allies, bankers, tech CEOs, as well as critics and independent experts. Everyone's on the same page of the obvious uncertainty because you could see them making it up on the White House lawn. But you go on to say we're still at risk of a major financial crisis. You refer to one of the banks that failed early in the infamous '08 crash. You call it the Lehman moment, and how after that there were ups and downs, and then later the full-blown crash. I know you to not be alarmist, and yet you're referring to an alarm of sorts. And so tell us what you mean by that we could still have the big one.
Okay. So, I could say sort of lots of people look at the stock market, but people who really are trying to track what might be happening to the economy look at the bond markets. They look at markets for particularly the sort of thing, not just the sort of big, but they look at things like 30-year bond rates. They look at spreads, all of which have blown out. It really looks like there's a retreat from a lot of the less liquid assets, I'm sorry, jargon, but this looks like it has the lights on the financial system are flashing yellow. There's just a lot of stuff going on that looks very much like the beginnings of a financial crisis, something like 2008. And as best we can tell, the dislocation from these tariffs and the uncertainty is actually really stressing things out. There are key players in the financial system, hedge funds, that are being forced into what amount to fire sales of assets because they're essentially getting margin calls. And it's just the early stages of that. But, that's something you don't want to play with. And market observers were pretty close to panic before Trump did his retreat, which wasn't really a retreat on tariffs. And I'm looking at things like the value of the dollar, looking at the 30-year bond yield. And, we're still very much in dangerous territory, even after, I think at close of markets today.
Would you liken that more to an athlete who's had the cartilage wear down over years and their knees likely to blow out either way? And so when they do something really tough, like maybe go down a double black diamond ski hill they shouldn't have, they increase the odds of blowing it out, but it was high odds? Or do you look at it as something where this person could have gone on healthy, but they took a hammer to their knee? Which is more likely in the financial crash scenario? I'm trying to understand if this was coming anyway and Trump made it worse, or Trump would be the cause, as the Times put it.
Yeah, this is right. This is completely out of left field. I mean, we had an inflation report today, which is still basically pre-Trump, right? The tariffs haven't had a chance to have effect. And the inflation report, together with everything else, confirms that Trump inherited an economy that looked pretty good. Pretty low inflation, solid job growth, no great financial stress. All of these measures that show financial stress were looking fine, on January 20th. So this is really, this is just, the economy is never invulnerable to stress. And if you hit it with the biggest tariff increase in history, then it's going to dislocate financial markets. And I have to admit, I was surprised at how serious the strains appear to be. This wasn't quite on my dance card, but once you see it happening, you say, "Oh gosh, this is one of the effects of tariffs that we weren't thinking about."
What did you think in conclusion of the Wall Street Journal, which at times you've written about and disagreed with their editorial board? A classic for Krugman readers would be, when you went to battle with them over them calling certain safety net recipients, quote, lucky duckies, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But here they are saying something similar to what you've written, that Trump's tariffs are the biggest driver of instability in the global economy. Are they right? And what does it tell you that that's where they're landing?
Yeah, well, it's telling you that gone beyond I think a lot of people, Wall Street Journal editorial board types thought, well, Trump is going to slash benefits for the poor and the middle class. And he's going to help the rich. And that's fine. That's what we're for. And have now realized that the craziness, the obsession with tariffs and the craziness and incompetence can be bad for everybody. This is, it's possible to make things worse for the 1%, even as you're making things miserable for the rest of the country. And that's, I think, the Wall Street Journal editorial board has just caught on to just how bad things are.
Really striking. Nobel economist Paul Krugman, thank you so much. A very important voice right now. I'll tell folks what's coming up. One of the other places that the tariffs are hitting regular Americans, plus the tech elites, we'll get into that, and the new targets on Trump's demands for abuse of power, possibly illegal selective prosecution. We have a breakdown and a historian on that important story next. Trump's tariffs sending shockwaves through the markets, continuing down today. Many MAGA bankers and Wall Street titans, though, seemed shocked that Trump did what he had been threatening to do on tariffs. And many lost money and held losing market positions precisely because they were in basically denial about Trump's actual danger and his tariffs policies' danger to the markets. This is a point we have covered this week, and that writers like Michelle Goldberg or Paul Krugman, who just joined us, have been documenting how supposedly smart insiders were deluded because they were resisting uncomfortable truths about Trump, which Trump himself had said. Ultimately, the insiders lobbied hard to try to get Trump's retreat yesterday, and many of the country's richest people have been losing the most after siding with Trump, thinking it would enrich them, among other things. And we're also seeing very powerful individuals buckle to threats of what amounts to illegal retaliation plans, if carried out. To pick one extreme example, Donald Trump claimed that he could have had Mark Zuckerberg jailed, and the president says that threat is probably what worked on Zuckerberg.
Do you think he's directly responding to the threats that you have made to him in the past?
Probably. Yeah, probably.
Probably, yeah, probably. So these Trump penalties and costs are how he does business. He admits it. They sometimes are going farther on the threat side than the benefit side, if you did a cost-benefit analysis with all the money they're losing. And these elites cannot say it's over. Remember, the second term just started. We're inside of 100 days. And remember, many of Wall Street's companies and executives are actually represented by a small number of top East Coast law firms, and many of them make their money by representing finance. That could be in legal cases, litigation, or it could be in being the lawyers that do those big deals. They have lawyers every time they do any big offering, merger, or purchase, and those firms make a lot of money. But Trump has been going after what amount to many of these bankers' lawyers. You've heard about these executive orders that target the law firms. Trump's reasoning is they want to, at the White House, punish people for ever representing Donald Trump's political opponents or groups linked to Democrats. But you've also seen headlines that make it sound like those are just Democratic groups, when in fact, for many of them, the bulk of their money is made representing Wall Street. Some firms fighting this as unlawful, but others rushing to cut deals with Trump that you've probably heard about. This is back in the news and relevant when you consider how these bankers are learning about how Trump really operates, and they've already noticed him coming after their lawyers. There's reporting 4 firms reached deals with Trump rather than fight him in court, and they're worried about their client relationships. So there are critics who say these lawyers who are so tough and fight so many cases, well, some of them are showing their willingness to appease Trump or cower. Top firm Paul Weiss rushed to cut a deal. Some of its own top lawyers, though, resigning in protest. So take this together. Bankers, many of them, did not believe Trump when he vowed the extreme tariffs. We actually have proof of that because they show their beliefs with their money and their positions, and they had underpriced this reality. Maybe they also don't believe Trump can impact their lives, their own lawyers. They didn't seem to believe his insistence that he'll try to rule past 2029, which is an illegal plan, even as the tariffs we just saw rocked these elites' money, lives, and their world, really. So when we look at what's coming down the pike, it's all related. If you can see, it's all coming from the same guy. This past week of a reality check could be a wake-up call for these financial elites and CEOs. They could see themselves as the exact type of independent powers which could end up being seen as standing in the way of Trump's stated plan to rule through 2029. They could pay the price. They could also see themselves in the stories of their lawyers who've been forced with admittedly tough decisions. If you have a whole company you're running and you don't want to go to war with this president, with this attitude, but that's just one step away from them. They could see their own story in these veteran government officials targeted by Trump in several ways, many of them not for being extreme lefties, but for being willing to serve Trump and then telling the truth about reality or his last failed bid to hold power after losing. There are reports about Trump's retribution efforts that the Times calls more expansive, efficient, and creative than anticipated. Trump has already been targeting some of these Democrats and his own former aides. How dare you work for him loyally and then say something in public afterward? And you have the career officials I mentioned. Beyond D.C., he's going after all kinds of institutions, those law firms. He sees them as democratic. Many of them are basically Wall Street's lawyers, universities, culture. And then you see there are more options. It doesn't all happen at once or overnight. We didn't see January 6th type violence in January or February 2017. We saw it by 2020. And much of what we've just seen from tariffs to retribution is measurably more extreme than the first term. So imagine you're a banker who understands that these powers could be used against you, like the lawyers or the immigrants. Imagine if you were like a 51-year-old Maryland mother, Elsie Barrios, who is an asylum seeker from El Salvador. She was on her way to work when her 18-year-old daughter was with her, which is how we know that she was approached by Trump's ICE agents. She made a request that is legal in this country, requesting the warrants. And by the way some people roll up on you, you want to make sure it's not some kidnapping plot. They didn't provide warrants. She refused to get out of the car, so they smashed in her window and approached her. Her daughter, I mentioned, recorded this. I'm showing you this reality. I also, as a newscaster, want to warn, depending on who's in the room, this video may be upsetting.
Si no me baja, si no,
no,
you no deja que lo revienten.
No, if it's against, no.
What she said?
You guys cannot take her just because you guys want to. Mommy, no, mommy.
This is America under Donald Trump. If you care about all people, and we have a constitution that says there are rights that are afforded to people, even if they're undocumented residents, even if they're convicted of a crime, you're not allowed to torture them in prison. We are that country. But if you don't even just see it that way, if you're a banker saying it could never happen to you, look at the patterns I just told you and how much of this has been increasing over time. I can report that the Trump administration asserts that the individual you saw on the screen there, that she has gang ties. Her attorney denies that, and we haven't had the due process yet to get into the evidence. We'll present it when we get it. She's in custody in Pennsylvania. If you notice that the temperature's going up, it is. And if you're thinking that won't happen to you, the president says everyone's fair game, including jailing Mark Zuckerberg. Where does this fit into history? Well, Doug Brinkley, the historian, joins me next.
Have you noticed that lots of law firms have been signing up with Trump? They give you $100 million and then they announce that, but we have done nothing wrong. And I agree, they've done nothing wrong. But what the hell? They give me a lot of money considering they've done nothing wrong. And we'll use some of those people, some of those great firms. They are great firms too. They just had a bad moment.
Fact check, partly true. Donald Trump referring to all the money he's gotten from these law firms that wanted to cut deals. We're joined by historian Doug Brinkley. We walked through the link here to what's happening in the markets. There are those who seem perpetually shocked that Trump does what he says, and he's more unbridled now.
Because Donald Trump's first term, he had those guardrail advisors, as we used to call them, Attorney General Barr or, Mark Milley or somebody in the White House that say, no, you cannot do that. Those people don't exist anymore. This is Donald Trump unplugged. This is Donald Trump who had got through three of our Supreme Court justices his first term, who thinks the court system will bend to his will. And even if they don't, he'll say, screw it, because I've been given ability to pardon myself and pardon anybody. So he is a man unaccountable right now to anybody except perhaps Wall Street.
There are lessons from history, right?
Oh, yeah. I think of, it really rings, don't want to go too far back, but it rings my Andrew Jackson bell, because when Jackson lost in 1824, but then came back and won in 1828, he smashed up the Democratic Republican Party, made it the Democratic Party, but it was vindictive of anybody who ever did anything against him. It was a revenge. And Jackson, the Supreme Court told Andrew Jackson in Worcester versus Georgia, you can't do the Trail of Tears. You can't remove indigenous people from their ancestral lands. The court said no. And Jackson said, screw you. I can do what I want. So in Trump, you have, like Jackson, a maximalist president.
And the lessons for the public in a civil society, if we can maintain it, seems to be counting on it not happening to you. Seems like, even by the self-interest, forget your obligations, but by self-interest, it seems like a poor strategy. During the Red Scare, if you said, well, I'm a big Hollywood guy, I'm a big Titan, couldn't ever happen to me in my world.
Well, also remember the first time when Trump was president, you had the rhinos, and there still was a battle for the heart and soul Republican Party. Trump owned it, but nevertheless, there is nobody in the Republican Party standing up to Trump now. It is his brand. You might as well call it Trump.
But does history suggest that it works to say, oh, it won't happen to me?
No, of course it's going to come right at you, and everybody's learning it the hard way. Yeah, there are those tech bros, the Musk and company, that just want a Wild West, unregulated, technological world. But most normal Fortune 500 companies here are watching these stocks tumble, go up, down, utter chaos. It's almost the biggest cliche in America. Wall Street hates chaos. Look what we're living in right now. And look how much more dangerous the world's going to get as we're squaring off with China. There is no diplomacy in Israel. He's not working to get, or they haven't been released, the hostages that Gaza took. So, there are other things to be focused on. He said day one, I'm going to end the war in Ukraine and Russia. Well, we're getting to day 100. That's not going on, because he's just trying to jerk everybody every day around. So if somebody says 20% tariffs on America, he'll say 25, and then you move the goalpost 30.
And on immigrants, in first term, they worked very hard to deport, and they were accused of cruelty, documented, and we saw the treatment of children and separation policy. But this time, it seems even more extreme at the outset, that they're going to send this message through alleged mistreatment of immigrants. Why start there?
Because that was the big issue of the campaign. And Donald Trump, first round, said he'd build this wall and nobody would get through, but there was no real wall. It was a half wall. So he read the electorate and said, I'm going to be ardent and crunch down on these people. What is really, we're looking at Guantanamo times 10 now with El Salvador. It used to be, we did waterboarding of a terrorist in Guantanamo, an American base. Now with Blackwater, Prince, trying to get into El Salvador, we're trying to just say, get them out of the country. It's cheaper, and create this prison system in El Salvador.
Well, it's a fascinating parallel you make. We should get into it more. That Gitmo was controversial at the time, and those were largely, not all, but largely people picked up abroad with an asserted tie to terrorism. Here, you're saying it's like Gitmo, and it's coming, they're in the country, they're in our authority. So, well, let's return to that. I'd love to talk to you more about that. I hadn't heard that comparison. Doug Brinkley, great historian, thank you. We have a quick break, but another guest coming up, as the DOJ says maybe those convicts on Jan 6 should actually get government money. We have breaking news right now from the Supreme Court. It just dropped moments ago in a huge case. The Supreme Court dealing what appears to be a blow against the Trump administration's more extreme immigration claims. This is on that big case where the administration did acknowledge an error of wrongly deporting this Maryland father from the United States to El Salvador. This new order says, and I'll be reading this, and it's breaking news. We have Douglas Brinkley standing by, but this is the pages of the order there, and I'm going to read a key part, hot off the presses of the Supreme Court, if you will, in a ruling largely against what the Trump administration wanted. The court, in a majority that includes a broader alliance of justices, including the Chief Justice, says that the lower court order, which is what the Trump administration was appealing, quote, remains in effect and just requires clarification. The court says the order properly requires the Trump administration to facilitate Abrego Garcia, that's the detainee or the immigrant I mentioned, to facilitate his release from custody in El Salvador and ensure his case is handled as it would have been had he not been, quote, improperly sent to El Salvador. This is, at a minimum, a partial victory for dealing with the error. It is, in that sense, a setback for the Trump administration on one of the biggest conflicts around immigration. I also want to be clear, in no way is this a final resolution about everyone else on that plane, the timing of those plane rides, the allegations that the plaintiffs have made that basically argued that the Trump administration openly and willingly defied what were the lower court orders. This is specific to the error deportation. And we are joined by presidential historian Doug Brinkley. In all honesty and fairness, I will tell folks he was with us on another topic. We did touch on immigration, so he's learning of this news at the same time, too. That's how breaking news works. I'm going to read this key passage one more time and get your thoughts on this, including the history we're talking about. But basically, the court says the lower order, which Trump administration did not like, remains overall in effect, and the Trump administration must facilitate Garcia's release from custody in El Salvador. So the Trump administration has said, oops, we made a mistake. We sent him there. Nothing we can do. The Supreme Court of the United States, in this ruling, which has the Chief Justice and is joined by Sotomayor and others, says, no, you must facilitate him back to the U.S. because of the mistake you made.
The Supreme Court's correct, because what the Trump administration's been doing is allowing ICE to come in and see somebody. You can break a window in a car and take them, but when you deport somebody in 48 hours or try to get rid of them out of the country, naturally you lose your legal rights. You're not going to be able to go through a due process. There are 100,000 people that Donald Trump's deported since January. The public wants bad people apprehended, but you can't willy-nilly just grab people and then get them out of the country, because you're bound to have a mistake like this, and there'll be more to come. Trump sees, as we mentioned before, El Salvador is this idea where don't get a jury involved, don't go through the court system, arrest, deport, dump them into El Salvador, who's making money on this new kind of prison system, and maybe have Eric Prince or Blackwater, somebody help build new prison systems in El Salvador. That's going to become a big story, that we're not allowed to do that.
Well, you're drawing attention to the outer line here. In other words, the Trump administration argued, even if they made a mistake, they have broad powers to deal with what they call the bad guys. And here you have the Chief Justice joined by Obama appointees and others saying, of course you want to get bad guys, but wherever the line is, however far the government and the Trump administration pushes it, that's then the line for everyone. I want to bring in, because it's a big story, we've got a lawyer on the phone, and I'm also going to read from one part of Sotomayor's statement. But we're joined by a former federal prosecutor, Ankush Khardori, who also covers law for Politico Magazine. Welcome. You can hear me?
Yes.
Ankush, we were just discussing this. I want to get your reaction. And on the point about how far the court could go and how far Trump is allowed to go, Sotomayor joined. So we have this coalition, and she writes separately in agreement to say, quote, I agree with the court order that the remedy is to provide Garcia with all process to which he would have been entitled had he not been unlawfully removed. But she also points out that the Trump argument implies, and this is what she says they wanted, quote, that it could deport and incarcerate any person, including citizens, without legal consequence, so long as it does so before a court can intervene. Explain what she is writing and saying there, and your view of this order.
Yeah, I mean, the issue at stake here was, that the administration basically said, we made a mistake. We've sent him to El Salvador. Now it's out of our hands. And the point that Sotomayor was making was that, well, mistakes come in all forms. In this instance, they had a mistake about, they claim, about whether he was allowed to stay here, but mistakes and errors can come for any or all of us. So her point was that, like, allowing the government's position to stand would really threaten the liberty of all of us. And with respect to the bottom line result here, it is undoubtedly the correct one. But as you and I both know, a lot is going to come down to the word facilitate. And I fear that, we may be in store for some wrangling around that word and how far the court can compel them to take those steps, and how the court might even police their ability to be undertaking those steps in good faith, quite frankly.
Right. And so you're drawing attention to that word. We have that word on the screen right now. This is a short document, the Chief Justice's section, under 2 pages, and then another 2.5 from the Sotomayor statement I mentioned. Everything hangs on facilitate, because I'll remind viewers, the whole issue was, okay, Trump folks were saying, even if we made a mistake, they really don't care. Their view was, hey, they're taking aggressive action to defend America, so he's stuck down in that prison. His lawyers, the plaintiff, and a lot of human rights groups said that's untenable under law and outrageous as a result. So you got to bring him out of that prison. I will remind viewers that there is a separate legal debate over where he should go. In other words, he was in custody here, and he may not be able to stay in the United States indefinitely, but there was law against him, I'm simplifying, being thrown back to El Salvador. So facilitate to the government would seem to me, Ankush, fix it, meaning he doesn't rot away in this foreign prison. You're pointing out that the Trump administration, or potentially any lawyer acting in bad faith, could say, quote, we'll try to facilitate for a few years while he does rot away in a foreign prison.
That's my worry, quite honestly, because you're right. Any good faith reading, I think, of that opinion, I mean, the word facilitate is a little curious, but if I were on the receiving end of an order like that, I would expect to advise the client that they need to get this done as quickly and expeditiously as possible. But what we've seen with this administration, including this whole effort to deport people under the Alien Enemies Act, has been a lot of very tendentious reasoning, a lot of efforts to find gaps in the law, exceptions to sort of game the law. That strategy permeates this whole process. The very fact that we're talking about the Alien Enemies Act being applicable within our borders during peacetime is already quite remarkable to me. But that's how far they've taken us already.
Right. I'm going to read from one other section of Chief Justice Roberts' ruling here, referring to the district court ruling, which was against Trump. He says that court should clarify its directive with due regard for deference owed to the executive branch. And then he writes, for its part, the Trump administration should, quote, be prepared to share what it can concerning the steps it has taken and the prospect of further steps. Do you view that, in the sort of dry language of the court, as a slight brushback to the antics we've seen from DOJ? Or do you view that as more of just an even-handed boilerplate closing of the state of the ruling?
I wish that comment would have been more pointed, because, of course, they've already attempted to evoke the state secrets privilege in the course of this litigation, and it was not very credible. And so, all we can do, I think, at this point, is hope that they interpret this in good faith and try to comply in good faith, because that is the right outcome here.
Ankush Khardor, a former federal prosecutor, historian Doug Brinkley, still with us with our final 1 minute here. We talked through the law. What do you see as the larger sweep? Before this dropped, you were reminiscing about times where the Supreme Court and an aggressive president have clashed. This is a setback for the Trump administration, but not in a slam dunk way that ties their hands. As Ankush and I discussed, there's a world where they could stonewall and say, we tried to facilitate, but we still get the outcome we want. What are you going to do?
Earlier, Ari, you were mentioning, Meta, Zuckerberg, and, $25 million, and Trump saying, he cut a deal and let him off the hook. You talked about Paul Weiss's law firm and the law firm's issue. We're seeing what people are wondering is who's going to stand up if Trump's an authoritarian. And the Supreme Court here, having Sotomayor and Justice Roberts on the same page on something like this, is a sign that the Supreme Court isn't rubber stamping what Donald Trump's doing, and that's important for Trump to get the message that he just can't run shotgun over the law.
Absolutely. Well, this is what we've been following. We're ending the night on this breaking news. Again, that statement from Sotomayor joining the Chief Justice and warning that Trump implied he would want to be able to, quote, deport and incarcerate anyone, including American citizens, without due process. The court pushing back against exactly that. Thank you for watching The Beat with Ari Melber here on this very busy night.